most dangerous phrase in science isn't what you think it is. It's not some complex equation or technical jargon that only professors understand. The most dangerous phrase in science is actually pretty simple. That sounds crazy. Throughout history, this innocent little sentence has delayed medical breakthroughs, cost countless lives, and held back human progress for decades. But here's the twisted part. The crazier an idea sounds, the more likely it is to completely revolutionize our understanding of reality. Today we're diving into the wild world of scientific theories that were absolutely demolished by the experts, laughed out at conferences, and treated like complete nonsense by the smartest people on the planet. These weren't just minor disagreements or polite academic debates. We're talking about ideas that got scientists fired, ridiculed, and in some cases literally committed to mental institutions. Yet every single one of these supposedly insane theories is now considered basic scientific fact that you probably learned in high school. And honestly, this pattern is so consistent, it's almost disturbing. The more revolutionary an idea is, the more aggressively the scientific community seems to reject it. We're going to explore why this happens, how it keeps happening, and what it means for the groundbreaking discoveries happening right now that everyone thinks are complete garbage. Let me start with something that'll blow your mind. Picture this scenario. You're a respected doctor in the 1840s, and one of your colleagues walks up to you and says that invisible tiny creatures living on your hands are killing your patients. Not only that, but he wants you to wash your hands with some weird chemical solution between every single patient visit. Your immediate reaction would probably be to think this guy has completely lost his marbles. I mean, come on, invisible creatures. That's like saying ghosts are performing surgery. This is exactly what happened to Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor who noticed something absolutely bizarre in the maternity wards where he worked. In one ward run by doctors, women were dying at frighteningly high rates after giving birth. But in another ward run by midwives, the death rates were dramatically lower. Semmelweis couldn't figure out what was different until he made a connection that would change medicine forever. The doctors in the high mortality ward were coming directly from performing autopsies on dead bodies and then immediately delivering babies without washing their hands. Semmelweis realized that something invisible was being transferred from the corpses to the living mothers, causing them to die from what we now know as infection. His solution was radical for the time. Wash your hands with chlorinated lime solution between patients. The results were immediate and undeniable. Maternal mortality rates dropped from over 10% to less than 2% almost overnight. You'd think the medical community would be celebrating this incredible breakthrough, right? Wrong. They absolutely attacked and dismissed him for it. The established medical experts were deeply offended by the suggestion that gentlemen doctors could have dirty hands. The prevailing medical wisdom at the time blamed disease on bad air, imbalanced bodily fluids, and mysterious forces that nobody really understood. The idea that tiny invisible organisms could cause disease was considered completely ridiculous pseudoscience. Semmelweis became increasingly frustrated and outspoken as he watched preventable deaths continue while his colleagues ignored his findings. The medical establishment's response was brutal. In 1865, they had him committed to a mental asylum where he was beaten by guards and died just 2 weeks later from infected wounds. The man who discovered one of the most important principles in medicine was effectively punished to death for trying to save lives. But here's where it gets even more insane. It took decades after his death for the medical community to finally accept what we now call germ theory. When Louis Pasteur and later Robert Koch provided the scientific explanation for how bacteria cause disease, suddenly everyone realized that Semmelweis had been right all along. The invisible creatures he couldn't explain were real, and his hand-washing protocol became standard medical practice. This tragic story perfectly illustrates why revolutionary scientific ideas get rejected so forcefully. It's not because the evidence is weak or the logic is flawed. It's because accepting these ideas means admitting that everything the experts thought they knew was wrong. And that's a psychological blow that most people, even brilliant scientists, simply cannot handle. Now let's jump to something that sounds even more absurd. Imagine telling someone that the massive continents we live on are actually floating around the planet like giant puzzle pieces, constantly moving and crashing into each other over millions of years. You'd probably get the same reaction people gave to Alfred Wegener in 1912 when he proposed exactly that theory. Wegener noticed something that seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then. The coastlines of South America and Africa looked like they would fit together perfectly if you remove the Atlantic Ocean. He also found identical fossils and rock formations on continents separated by thousands of miles of ocean. To him, this could only mean one thing. These continents had once been connected and had somehow drifted apart. The scientific community's response was swift and merciless. They called his ideas delirious ravings and accused him of having moving crust disease. American scientists were particularly brutal, dismissing continental drift as Germanic pseudoscience and claiming Wegener was manipulating evidence to support his fantasy theories. The problem wasn't that Wegener's evidence was wrong. It was actually pretty compelling. The issue was that he couldn't explain how continents could possibly move. The physics didn't make sense to anyone at the time. How could massive chunks of rock weighing billions of tons just slide around the Earth's surface? The forces required seemed impossible to generate. German geologists absolutely tore apart his claims in academic journals, while American paleontologists accused him of cherry-picking data to support his wild theories. Wegener spent years defending his work, but the scientific establishment had made up their minds. Continental drift was nonsense, and that was final. Here's the kicker, though. Wegener died in 1930 on a research expedition in Greenland, never knowing that he'd been completely right. It wasn't until the 1960s, more than 30 years later, that new technology finally revealed the mechanism he couldn't explain. Sonar mapping of the ocean floor showed underwater mountain ranges and deep trenches that proved the seafloor was spreading. Suddenly, continental drift made perfect sense, and it evolved into what we now call plate tectonics. But wait, it gets even weirder. Let's talk about something that sounds so ridiculous it's almost laughable. The idea that most stomach ulcers are caused by bacteria, not stress or spicy food. In the 1980s, two Australian doctors named Barry Marshall and Robin Warren made this exact claim, and the medical world went absolutely ballistic. For decades, everyone knew that ulcers were caused by too much stomach acid, usually triggered by stress, lifestyle choices, or eating the wrong foods. The treatment was antacids, bland diets, and sometimes surgery to remove parts of the stomach. The pharmaceutical industry was making billions selling acid-blocking medications to ulcer sufferers. Then Marshall and Warren showed up claiming that a spiral-shaped bacterium called Helicobacter pylori was actually responsible for most ulcers. The reaction was immediate and hostile. How could any bacteria possibly survive in the incredibly acidic environment of the human stomach? It violated everything medical schools were teaching about human physiology. The established gastroenterology experts were furious. They'd built entire careers on treating ulcers as chronic conditions caused by modern lifestyle factors. Marshall later recalled that everyone was against them, but they knew they were right. The medical journals refused to publish their research, and conferences wouldn't let them present their findings. The resistance got so intense that Marshall did something absolutely insane to prove his point. In 1984, he deliberately infected himself with H. pylori by drinking a culture of the organisms. Within days, he developed gastritis and the early stages of an ulcer. Then he cured himself with antibiotics, proving beyond any doubt that bacterial infection caused the condition. Even with this dramatic self-experimentation, it took over a decade for the medical community to grudgingly accept the bacterial theory of ulcers. The turning point came when other researchers began replicating Marshall and Warren's results, and pharmaceutical companies realized they could make money selling antibiotics instead of just acid blockers. In 2005, more than 20 years after their initial discovery, Marshall and Warren finally received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Their work had revolutionized the treatment of peptic ulcers, transforming them from chronic conditions requiring surgery into infections treatable with antibiotics. The pattern here is becoming pretty clear, right? Revolutionary scientific discoveries don't get politely debated in academic journals. They get absolutely hammered by skepticism from experts who have too much invested in the old ways of thinking. The more groundbreaking the idea, the more intense the rejection tends to be. This brings us to something that'll really mess with your head. The realization that this exact same process is probably happening right now with ideas that sound completely crazy to us today. Somewhere out there, some researcher is probably sitting on a discovery that will fundamentally change how we understand reality, and everyone thinks they're absolutely nuts. So here's the thing that should both caution and excite you. Right now, at this very moment, there are scientists somewhere being laughed at for ideas that will probably be taught in textbooks 50 years from now. There are researchers getting their funding cut, their papers rejected, and their reputations damaged for discoveries that future generations will consider obvious common sense. Think about it. Every single theory we've talked about today followed the exact same pattern. Brilliant observation, overwhelming evidence, complete rejection by experts, decades of ridicule, then sudden acceptance when the old guard finally steps aside or gets proven wrong. And this cycle keeps repeating because human nature doesn't change, even when humans get smarter. The really wild part is that we can't even recognize which crazy ideas are actually revolutionary breakthroughs in disguise. That research paper everyone's calling pseudoscience might be the next germ theory. That scientist everyone thinks is delusional might be the next Wegener or Marshall. The theory that sounds completely insane to you right now might be the foundation of tomorrow's medical treatments. But here's what you can do with this knowledge. The next time you hear about some scientific discovery that sounds absolutely ridiculous, don't immediately dismiss it. Ask yourself, does this sound crazy because it's actually wrong? Or does it sound crazy because it challenges everything we think we know? Because history has shown us that the difference between those two things is often the difference between stagnation and revolution. And who knows? Maybe someday you'll be the one with the crazy idea that changes everything. Just be prepared for everyone to think you're completely nuts first.